Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session on business continuity planning. Thanks for joining. My name is Lori Halverson, and I'm the Associate Vice President of Worldwide Customer Operations for Agilent Technologies. Pre-COVID, most of us did not think about business continuity. It just was not on the top of people's minds. Now, according to the opening poll, 57% of us say that it's significantly more important than it was. And that's not surprising, really, because both small and really large companies struggled to get people moved at home. And that's mainly because they didn't have a plan, they didn't have a documented plan to do so. So everyone had previously relied on, or most companies previously relied on, rolling sites over. So if they had a telephony issue or some other issue, they would roll to another site, or they'd push customers to a self-service channel, as in Amazon's case. And this worked well until COVID hit, and none of the sites were available to be pushed to. So in the next 25 minutes or so, we're going to look at what to consider as you build and bolster your business continuity plan. We're going to look at putting your plan into action. And then I'm going to share a roadmap or a guide to help you build or bolster your current business continuity plan. So what are the elements of a continuity plan? The first is there are basically three elements. One is technology and infrastructure, and they go hand in hand. Second is process and ownership, which also go hand in hand. And then lastly, people, which is not something that I think most people think about when building a business continuity plan, but it's just as important. So underlying these, of course, are communication and customer satisfaction. So let's break these down a bit. So until COVID, system availability was the most likely disruption that was included in BCP plans. So most plans included redundancy in core IT systems, rerouting calls, as I mentioned, and being able to change IVRs to redirect customers. But rerouting calls isn't always possible, even in a non-COVID world. It's either not feasible or it's not optimal from a customer perspective. For example, politics and language requirements can make it impossible to route calls. Our Taiwan office is a great example. Routing calls from Taiwan to China without impacting customer satisfaction is just not possible. And with a few Japanese speakers outside of Japan, we had to have a work at home plan in the event that reps could not access the office. So for us, this meant having laptops, having headsets and soft phones, which ultimately made the transition relatively seamless for our employees to move home. Our continuity plan also included traditional disruptions that required moving to and from the office pretty quickly. Examples are snowstorms and civil unrest. And in our Barcelona office, in fact, we had to move people back and forth from the office on a moment's notice during the civil unrest that they had with protests and elections. And if you work at home, if your team is working at home longer like they are now, look to plan for everything from Wi-Fi outages, self-service outages, if your teams are using cell phones as their main method of communication instead of headsets. And then think about how your employees are both capturing and disposing of customer data, which is really critical from an audit perspective. And then lastly, have a plan for every channel, because every channel is a completely different beast, and it really requires a unique planning, both for customers and employee communication to security to fraud prevention. So think beyond the big stuff. For example, for our business at quarter end, we noticed that some of our key customers were not able to place really large orders on our web. So we worked with our IT partners to connect our IT team with certain key customers to resolve any issues that they had on a moment's notice. So if you haven't done so, the next big thing is looking at process and ownership of your plan. So if you haven't done so, identify your key processes and touch points that have the highest customer impact in the event of a failure. So if you look at your employee and customer journey maps, they're a great way to find risk areas and what the likelihood is of occurrence. And for every scenario, assess every scenario individually for the likelihood of occurrence, for the risk of occurrence, and for the customer impact. Not all scenarios need to be planned for, but make sure at least the medium and high ones are, especially if you don't have a current plan and you're starting to build one. Think through the different scenarios for your broader business as well. These might occur, things that might occur that would impede your ability to maintain your operations. So not just for your contact center, but really across your broader organization. So when would manual processes be required? You may need to develop manual backup procedures and tools that your reps are going to need to execute your processes. And hopefully you won't need to go through fully manual processes or ever implement those. But continuity planning is really all about being ready before something happens, not when it happens. For example, if your systems are down for an extended period of time, how will you communicate and manage the flow of information between your customer service and your customer service teams or your contact center teams and your key partners, such as logistics or service organizations? So if customers still need to place orders, but your systems are down, do you have manual processes that allow you to get that information to those teams so that your customers, for example, can still have their products serviced or their products delivered? And how will you track rep interaction and notes and follow-up if you're in a completely system down type environment? What manual tools are they going to need? And are these documented? These are important questions to ask as you're building your plan. Customers might be understanding during the event, like COVID, when everybody is moving at home. I think there wasn't anybody who wasn't accepting and understanding of the challenges because everybody was going through them. But customers won't be as forgiving if service levels aren't back up to par after an event. So as you look to move your folks home, you look to transition back to a normal environment, whatever that is, then customers are not going to be as understanding if it doesn't go smoothly. And this is the same for any event. You don't want to have your customers go from having an event that disrupts them and continuing to have that go on way past the event. So one of the key success factors, and I can't stress this enough, is really having a dedicated worldwide BCP program owner. Or if you're America's only, have a region or country BCP owner. This person can be responsible for documenting your plan, for training, for communication, for testing, remediation, and ultimately should own everything from soup to nuts, from planning through execution, through follow-up, and revising the process after you have an event. And lastly, think about how people will access the information. So in our case, we wanted to make sure that people could actually execute the plan when necessary. In order to do this, it's very important to have hard copies. So our teams had hard copies of information both at work and at home, so they knew who to contact and how to execute. So people. If you aren't familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, now is a really good time to become familiar with it, because COVID has taken many people down a rung or two. And COVID aside, many situations affect employee communication and their position on the hierarchy. So from job security, which is a big worry for employees right now, again, to civil unrest. So in planning for different scenarios, consider your employees' mental health and well-being in addition to their ability to access the tools they need to execute your business continuity. So this can impact the number of people that you need for the rollover requirements. So for example, in one fire that we had in California, we had to roll our team over to a sister site that understood those products. And then we had to have that site be backed up in another site because they couldn't handle it. So think past, just your typical, we're going to roll over to one site, but think farther on and say, okay, how much can this site handle? Do we need to go to a smaller site and then have those calls rolled to a larger site? So be thinking about really outside the box in those type of areas. Employees today also move around a lot more than what we've seen in the past, and employee turnover can really be impactful on your customers. So consider this from a day-to-day perspective. It's not a big event, but day-to-day employee moves, especially if you lose top performers, can really make a difference to your business. So consider a formal at-risk employee review system. So this is where, when talking with your teams in one-on-one environments, they identify potential talent loss before it happens. And not just, for backup planning that this person's going to be out, but really to keep high performing reps and keep those in your company that you don't want to lose to another organization. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about engagement and the importance of building trust. So make sure to have one-to-one time with your employees. I think most people, when you're in the office, I hear a lot of people say, well, I talk to my people every day. I walk by their office, we chit chat. But it's not the same as sitting down and having a real dedicated one-to-one discussion with your employees. Especially in the work and home environment, it's critically important, even more so than when you're in the office, to ask how it's going working at home. Assess their mental health, ask how their family's doing. Continue to talk about their goals, their development, and what they need from you, because this is how you not only build trust, but this is how you're going to find out what's going on with your staff. And right now, employees have a lot of uncertainty. Reps who are doing really well in the office and were able to solve problems are not able to do that. And other employees who maybe were so-so in the office are really stepping up now and they have more resilience in this type of environment. So talk to your people and really understand what's going on. This is going to help them reduce an uncertainty about their job, and it's going to give them one less thing to distract them from their customers. So putting it all into action. The first thing is communicate, communicate, communicate. The plan is only as good as the communication supporting it. So everyone from your frontline reps all the way up to your senior manager should understand the plan and their role from activation all the way to ramp down. The other thing that I cannot stress enough is test, test, and test. So where plans fail, this is where plans fail before they even start. You don't know what's not working unless you test it. So in our company, we do mock tests to uncover gaps in the plan, and we do these pretty consistently. And they look like anything from, hey, we call a site and say you can't get into the office, or we call a site and say your system's down, or there's been a snowstorm and we have no electricity across half of our workforce and they're at home, they're stuck at home. So do these mock tests to uncover the gaps in the plan. And an example of one that we did was where we said, okay, you can't get into the office today. And we found that people had not been taking their laptops home. So part of our plan was we had a certain really core team of people who would take their laptops home every day, so that if we had an event where we couldn't get in the office, we could still maintain some continuity in our business. But we found that people weren't taking the laptops home. And when we looked into it, the reason was they didn't want to carry their laptops on hour-long train rides home to and from the office. And so we were able to look at how do we adjust that? What do we do? And we were able to close that gap, which was a really significant gap in our plan. So testing can allow you to close the gaps. It can also help you look and build plans for new technologies or new channels that you might have put in place. And it allows you to update your org chart and the contact information. So this is a really key part of a plan, is knowing who to call and keep those handy and up to date at all times. So when looking at activating and ramping up and ramping down your plan, document key decision makers. So how and when will decisions be made, and who will make them? For example, in a snowstorm, who's the ultimate decision maker? Is it a facilities manager? Is it your contact center manager? And document how you'll communicate with reps and managers and customers for each scenario. So if there is a technology failure, how are you going to get the message out to your staff and to your reps about what's happening and whether they come in the office or not? And during execution, know how you'll monitor the impact and have templates already made for manual tracking of key data. And then already have planned who are you going to give that data to? Who will need what data? Because you definitely don't want to be trying to build those things and figure those things out when you're in the middle of a crisis. So ensure also that your employees know what to communicate to your customers. So otherwise they may send the wrong message. So you want to be very clear in your strategy of how and what you'll communicate so that your employees know what they should be saying to your customers. And finally, in ramp down, follow the same procedures as ramp up. Who are your key decision makers? Do we have the contact information for all of those people? Is there a communication plan and a communication method? So, for example, when you think about COVID, there's probably a lot of uncertainty. And I know I've talked to a lot of companies and a lot of employees who have a real anxiety and uncertainty around moving at home. So the question is, do your people know how you'll make the decision, when you'll make the decision, and how it will be communicated to move back into the office? And if not, it's time to be sharing that information. So building and bolstering your BCP. So I'm not going to go through this slide, but it's here for reference as you build your BCP or you look at revising your BCP and updating it. It's just a good roadmap to help think through some of the different aspects that are really important to look at as you plan and execute and review and update your plan. So in summary, don't wait until the next 100-year pandemic. It's the little things that are going to get you. So think beyond your core technologies, your infrastructure and tools. Think about your channels. Think about your scenarios. Think about your really high-risk areas and those that impact your customers. Have a dedicated BCP owner. Again, cannot stress that enough. You want someone who can oversee all of the changing, who can run your test scenarios, who can do training, and who can help manage through your execution. And don't forget about your people. Ultimately, they are the key to your business and your ultimate business continuity plan. And lastly, test, and test again. Uncover those gaps before it's too late. Thank you all for taking time to join today's session. It's been my pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much.